Hello and welcome to another episode of Dormroom Diplomacy. My name is Jack, joined as per usual by my lovely host, Mr. Matthew Nelson.
Howdy. We're back again this week. I wanted to make a quick, so last week I had mentioned that I had seen that video, right, about the city walking and stuff.
Yeah.
I watched the video and, we were talking about the social part of it. And what was really cool that I think, might be like something that would be a cool idea. Obviously, we talked about it being a cool idea, but one of the things that they featured in it was, it was shot in like a POV style. So, two guys walking around. But what they did was they went across in Tokyo. There's the districts, right? There's the specific townships, which in most cities, same thing. But they had the equivalent of $20 in each of the townships, and they could do whatever they wanted with it. And they went through like eight of the different districts, and I found that really cool. It was like, that's a way that like it's not just walking anymore. You have something you're doing. But I thought I'd just make a quick update. I was like, that's kind of cool.
Hey man, come up to visit me. We'll make it happen.
We'll do it for sure. Absolutely.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah, that'd be fun. But yeah, today we had a topic to introduce that we've been teasing for a while, kind of.
For sure.
Back when we did our episodes on kind of the triangle of health, we did our exercise episode, physical activity, all of that. And then we did kind of the diet one, nutrition, that type of stuff. There was sleep in there, all of these things, kind of these pillars, if you will. And today, talking about a lovely piece of that triangle, or, maybe it's not a triangle, but however you want to define it, but one of these pillars, that being supplementation or, drugs, things used in addition to sleep, exercise, diet, hydration, the added layer, perhaps the top of the pyramid in terms of your hierarchy of needs when thinking of health. I would kind of put it as, you have your foundation. If you want to put, down diet as your foundation, sleep, these very important things. Then you have like on the next layer, you can do like exercise, hydration, and then you're kind of moving up, and kind of towards the top, you have, supplements, and in some case drugs. And we'll kind of get into breaking everything into different branches. I think there's important distinctions to be made, because, while we may condone the use of certain things, that is not always the case. And so we'll kind of, get onto that. Because there's lots of, lines to be drawn, certainly when it comes to this. And so I think for starters, we can, define the differences between kind of these different, ways of categorizing various substances, if you want to call it that. And so I think what's important to think of is like supplementation in general. And I think the way most people think about it is, you're supplementing something that you're missing in your diet, where, perhaps I'm iron deficient. I don't eat a lot of leafy vegetables or something. I can then take a iron supplement to, quote unquote, supplement that, micronutrient in my diet to hopefully create a more holistic, nutrition plan, a better diet, all these things.
More general, right?
Right, yeah. And while that is certainly useful, and I certainly support that wholeheartedly and do that myself for some things that I may be deficient in, I think it's also important to look at supplementation as, almost how I like to describe it as the shotgun method, where supplements are very different from drugs, very different from other things, even, steroids, which maybe we can get into a little bit. All of these things that kind of people would put into this, they're technically, they are all supplements. Okay. They are supplemental to your diet and your nutrition, but obviously there's different tiers here. And so with supplements, I think, that whole shotgun approach idea is more, when it comes to supplements, you can't a lot of the times, and we'll get into the nuance here. And also, I want to preface all of this by saying, we are not registered nutritionists. We are not doctors. Our advice, do not take this as a medical advice. This is, if we give any advice, it's advice based on anecdotal evidence,
Right.
because it's things that we have done or research that we have done. And
Right.
so you are responsible for doing your own due diligence if you're actually making a decision when it comes to your health, because everyone is different and everyone's affected differently by certain things.
For sure.
But when it comes
Good
to
disclaimer.
supplements, waive our liability away. Don't come after us
Absolutely.
when you take, some college kids' advice on what supplements you should take.
Right.
Really? Like, seriously? But I think it's important to think when, at least in terms of supplements, a good way to categorize it is most supplements are things that you can take and there are no negative consequences. Now, there may not be any positive consequences either. A lot of, a lot of these supplements that we'll kind of talk into, we'll get into specific examples. And the reason I brought up the whole shotgun method is most of the time it's okay to take a lot of these, substances. And, I say substances and there's a negative connotation there, but I think you can kind of get the idea. But you take any of these things and there are no really negative downsides. Obviously, there's, daily recommended intakes, which a lot of the times you are never going to get even close to. Certainly with like a methylated form of a supplement where it's going to be very bioavailable. And essentially, it's just going to go straight through your bloodstream and you're going to piss it out. And there's not, at the end of the day, it's very, very difficult to, oversaturate, yourself with these type of supplements.
Right.
And so that's where that shotgun approach comes in. It's kind of, you just take a lot of kind of broad base supplements and it's the goal is you don't know exactly, what holes need to be plugged, quote unquote, or things need to be patched, however, whatever analogy
Right.
you want to use. But by taking kind of the broad range thing, a lot of people will take a multivitamin.
I was about to say, is this similar to the approach of the concept of like you said, a multivitamin?
It's
and
the
it just
idea-
covers all your bases.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is the same. I honestly think most people don't need to take a multivitamin. I think in most cases, it is not going to be very helpful for you because, I don't know, the numbers on it will vary person to person, but you're not getting the benefits of a majority of the components of that multivitamin just because they're dosed so low. You'd be much better off, instead of spending the money on the multivitamin, on purchasing a very particular supplement that is addressing a direct deficiency that you either think you have or through the help of a doctor, medical practitioner, you can figure out something you're deficient in and directly address that.
Right.
It's going to have a lot more tangible benefits than taking a multivitamin. Now, multivitamins are perfectly fine. It is not going to hurt you, and it a lot of the times can help, but not in the ways that people think, where they think, I'll take a multivitamin and it's going to make up for the fact that, I eat cheeseburgers, fries, and, drink 5 beers a day. It's like, no, diet comes first. Supplements, as the name implies, are supplemental to that, and they cannot fix a bad diet, just like you can't outtrain a bad diet.
And you've been speaking more specifically to the general health purposes of supplementation, of course. Kind of just like the, how like you said, how to upkeep your own, plug your own holes, how to upkeep your own maintenance on your body, right? So obviously there's definitely other purposes for supplementation as well, like you have talked about in the past briefly when it comes to not necessarily, I mean, to an extent, I suppose it's performance enhancing, but not in the context that's generally thrown around, right? You can supplement for, your exercise, so on and so forth. And I know you have a lot to talk about when it comes to those things. So I'm just curious, how do you obviously feel strongly about it. So I'd like to hear what, how you can go through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to vary. Like a lot of these type of things, it varies depending on what your goals are. For someone who's very, let's say performance oriented, where they're attempting to, if you're an athlete, for example, what the supplements that are going to benefit you the most are going to look very different than, someone who's just trying to create a kind of general nutritional plan, and just be, more mindful of their health. And, it's also going to vary if you are, for example, like an athlete, you have a lot of cardiovascular demands, like a track runner or something, compared to, a power lifter, where, those are two very different types of strain on the body, and different supplements are going to aid that much better than others. And so I think what it really comes down to is, like I was just saying before, none of this, and there's caveats here, but a majority of your broad-based supplements, and that's like, your vitamins, your minerals, there's a lot of like fatty acid, fish oil type supplements, your multivitamins, which is going to be a combination of all of these things. You have pro and prebiotics, those kind of fall into the category as well. A lot of greens powders, where it's an assortment of vitamins, antioxidants, whatever you have. Those kind of are falling into this category. I'm just kind of creating the broad umbrella here, where all of these things, and the one main caveat is fat-soluble vitamins, where I don't want to give advice when it comes to that, because the dosage does matter. And if you take for example, like a fat-soluble vitamin B, you can, quote unquote overdose, and it's not something that it's just gonna, it creates a lot of organ strain, and it's not as simple as, for example, like a methylated B vitamin, where you're going to absorb as much as your body can, and then the rest is just going to be excreted, and there's no consequences at the end of the day, even if you take something above your, recommended daily intake. And so in terms of this umbrella that I'm trying to kind of create here, the caveat is kind of those fat-soluble vitamins, and that's where you need to be more careful. Now, they're very useful when correctly implemented. That's, that is for sure, but you do need to be more careful with that, and that's not where you can really use that quote-unquote shotgun approach.
For people who perhaps aren't as versed in the, what that is, how can you distinguish between, your, however you call your normal vitamins versus these ones that have the caveats? How do you make that distinction as a consumer?
I mean, it should be pretty clearly labeled. Now, it's not going to say, this is fat soluble, but also like a good 99% of supplements on the shelves are not fat soluble. These are, the vitamins that are fat soluble it's a different bioavailability, and typically it's much more concentrated. That's the benefit, but you do need to be more careful, because instead of being excreted, they are, they solute into your fat, and it's stored in your fatty tissue and can create strain on your organs depending on where it dissolves into. And so it's, it's a pretty safe bet to make that you're not just buying fat soluble vitamins. But any supplementation that you're wanting to implement into your, your nutritional plan or whatever, like, do your research and make sure you're aware. Yeah. There's different versions of nearly every main, vitamin, mineral, all these things that, we were talking about. And so just, it's something that you should be conscious in doing if you're invested enough to be wanting to kind of take the next step and almost cap off that pyramid of health with supplementation. You should be willing to do the work of looking at how each of these is going to affect you, and whether any precursors you might have could predispose you to, various effects. Because at the end of the day, they do have effects. That's the entire point. And it's always the balancing act of, weighing the pros, the cons. Now, like I said, most of these, you can't really make a mistake with a lot of the broad-based vitamins, but at the end of the day, it's still important to be conscious of.
The stuff that could possibly raise concerns are more specialty, more specialty drugs that you probably had to put some effort into acquiring.
Yeah. And that's the big thing is, distinguishing between supplements, which are never going to require a prescription. You can just go buy them off the shelf. And, drugs, which are going to require, prescription. And obviously when we say drugs, we are not talking about illicit drugs. It's, legal, medical, like, I think it's pretty clear what it is we mean, but just want to make the distinction.
Yeah, for sure. There is one thing that I had thought about while you were talking, and it's somewhat completely different. I don't know if you can necessarily call it, I'd imagine it is supplementation just by definition, but you've seen all the new, not necessarily new, but it's kind of a thing where they're doing the liquid IV stuff, right? And I'm curious what your opinion on that, because I know that for a fact, the concept behind the basics is absolutely true and absolutely works. However, a lot of the marketing around some of these things are like, add this, add that for $7, add this for $8.
Right.
Is that part of, I don't know if you have much background on this, but is that part of the business more fish oil than real? But to the foundation of it, I know for a fact is, medically proven to be beneficial, right? Quickly introducing whatever electrolytes or fluids into your system has grand benefits to, supplementing stuff you may have lost through exercise or any other, form of losing vitamins and minerals, so on and so forth. But does the specific marketing behind add this, add that, like you'd have a protein or add like a smoothie shop, does that work, right?
Yeah, it's I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's the biggest thing when it comes to all of this is the whole, supplement, like all of it is a lot of these things. There's, scientific medical evidence to back it up, but these companies are not a lot of the times held accountable by the FDA for the claims that they're making. And so like, do I take a lot of, not a lot, but a decent amount of supplements? Like I have my routine that I stick to, and it's like, yes. So I'm not, I'm kind of, it's important to play both sides of the aisle, because a lot of it is not necessarily proven. And whether it is proven or not, a lot of the claims that these companies make are, they can twist their words to a pretty significant degree, and it ends up, being a little manipulative and deceiving to the customer. And so in terms of the liquid IV, you're right. There is scientific evidence to, support their effect. And I'm a fan, of the liquid IV. I've, used it in the past, and certainly I think the bigger thing here is a lot of companies will put into their products, and this is mostly the case in complex products. And so, for example, you have, a liquid IV, or you have like electrolyte drinks or powders, pre-workout is an example. Some proteins, if they're a complex protein, a greens powder, a pre or post, or like a prebiotic complex, for example. All of these things, when it's kind of a blend of, or even a multivitamin also would kind of fall into that, where it's combinations of things. At the end of the day, there is no governing body requiring these companies to dose in any certain type of way. And what oftentimes ends up happening is a company will include a vitamin, a mineral, a certain compound, some kind of ingredient in this complex they've created, and they'll just put in such a non-efficacious dose that will not ever have any effect. It's just, they'll put in like 10% of the recommended daily intake, but because it's in there, then they slap it on the marketing and say, oh, great source of vitamin B, or full dose of L-citrulline in here, and it's just a huge problem in all of those kind of complex products that companies offer. And so in terms of the whole, whether it's certain, deceptive marketing, I think a lot of the times it is, unfortunately. Now, there's great resources out on the internet where you can kind of verify dosages and compare supplements, which I think I fully recommend to people who are comparing these complex products. When you're, selecting single individual products, that are not complex, it's very hard to go wrong because you know exactly what the recommended daily intake is. Also, I recommend for most things to select one by one, and you
That was
use
a follow-up
kind of
question for you.
it's like you want to be, it's like experimenting almost. You're isolating variables. If you take, a new greens powder that has, 50 vitamins and minerals, you don't know which one of those is actually helping. Now, if it's helping and the other stuff isn't harming, the net benefit's the same. Yes, I agree with that. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to be cost effective, or if you're not trying to, take a, 20 different supplements every morning when you wake up, you want to kind of do a trial and error. It's an experimentation. You isolate the variables so you know what has a positive or a negative or no effect at all. And so that's what I typically recommend. Now, I know that sometimes, a complex product is either the most efficacious or the only thing available. And in that case, then it just becomes a matter of comparing and making sure that the claims that companies are making are valid and that efficacious doses are being provided.
Right. One of the things that I was going to ask as a follow-up question, you already answered one of my follow-up questions, but one of the things I was going to ask is, obviously these companies are to an extent required to put a nutrition facts on the back of their, like there's a label that's supposed to tell you what's in it.
Right.
Obviously is it just exclusively the claims that aren't validated by the FDA, or is it what is actually in the product itself? And is it more of a false marketing thing rather than a control of substances thing that we're talking about? Because otherwise I'd be very confused as to how these products are even, available to consumers if they have even the slightest possibility of causing major harm to an individual.
Yeah. So a few things with that. The first thing is, nearly all supplements need to be FDA approved. To get into a grocery store, a supplement store, even a lot of things to be sold online, needs to be FDA approved. Now, what does that mean? The FDA does not need to, they don't care if the supplement is going to change your life. The claims the company is making in terms of its effects really don't matter. Now, you can't go out there and say, this is going to add 10 years to your life, or this is going to cure cancer. Supplements are, different from drugs, where drugs, to be FDA approved, need to have proven in clinical trials to address the specific medical problem that they are marketing to, heal or, fix, I guess, for lack of a better term, whatever it is that that drug addresses. But supplements typically are not held to the same rules, and basically the FDA just needs to make sure that the supplements are not using any, banned illicit substances, obviously, that's kind of obvious, but also that it won't have any negative health effects. And so what that ends up meaning is a lot of companies don't put in full efficacious doses, because a lot of times a full efficacious dose is very close to a recommended daily intake, where anything over that can be negative, can have negative health implications. And so it's much easier to get FDA approved if, you're not pushing it that close to the boundary. And so the FDA doesn't need to approve if, you're putting in this correct amount of stuff, because, slap it on the label, and, 70-80% of people are never going to look at the label, and they're just going to buy the supplement because it's got good branding and it says it has the things that they're looking for, and they're like, oh, well, it must be the perfect dose for me. And that's really never the case. Basically,
what you're kind of saying is that, if you go online right now, and you go to the FDA or to, any, the FDA, obviously, and you say, okay, I'm going to look at this prescription-based drug like doxycycline, which is, used for XYZ, right? They'll have a whole write-up about it, and that's not necessarily what the FDA is doing for these supplements. Rather, they're just trying to make sure that it's not going to hurt you.
Exactly. And so it doesn't need to have the same clinical efficacy and have gone through all of these trials. Now, any supplement I would recommend, or any supplement that I think anyone should be taking, you should want, and you should look and do the research to see if this supplement has, gone through these clinical trials and been approved and has been shown to be effective in addressing what it is it's supposed to address. That's the whole point, right? But the FDA doesn't have to hold that same accountability to supplements.
So then you walk down the road of you have to either acquire a sort of, not necessarily brand loyalty, but you have to trust the brand in which you're buying from, because oftentimes I assume the forward-facing brands in this space probably conduct their own trials and do some of their own research, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And obviously, like anything we've said that has to do with, frankly, anything, but more specifically anything to do with our claims on, health and so forth, I think it's obviously just to do your research, trust the companies that seem like
and use a variety of sources.
Forward-facing.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think one thing also, this just ties back to your previous question, which is the greatest, pitfall of the supplement industry, that being proprietary blends. I despise them with my entire being, because, you'll look at a supplement, and this is typically, well, nearly always in those complex products that I was talking about earlier. And, let's say we have a greens powder or something, and it's going to say, or like a nootropic, for example, or a pre-workout, like these all fall under that umbrella. And, if we take a pre-workout and you have it broken into different proprietary blends, where they're not going to tell you exactly how much of each ingredient they have in. They're just going to say, oh, this is our energy complex. And it's going to say, total, 325 milligrams. And then it just lists the ingredients in there. And, maybe it's a kind of, you have your caffeine, maybe there's some L-theanine and, some other type of stimulant in there. And that's their energy complex. And there's a focus complex. And, you have some taurine in there, and you put all of like your more nootropic blend, and it just has at the top, a total milligram volume of that entire blend, but it doesn't give you a breakdown of the ingredients.
Right.
You really have no idea what's in there. And I despise, and I cannot believe that that's still even legal for companies to make these proprietary blends. And I mean, funny story, I'm not going to say the company, I should, but I'm not going to. But this was maybe a year and a half ago. I got offered a contract with a supplement company, and they began sending me like trial products, and it was kind of supposed to be a promotional partnership, like a sponsorship type deal. And they had recently switched over, and I was originally a huge fan, and I had used their stuff off and on, but they had recently switched over to using proprietary blends kind of right before this was being agreed upon. And I reached out to the contact I had there, and asked why they made the switch. And they said that it just made more sense for the operations of their business, which essentially meant, we want to save money, so we're going to take out some ingredients, make it proprietary blends so you can't tell, and then market it to people who aren't going to do their research. And I was like, okay, I don't want to be a part of this. I just can't promote that to anyone or recommend that to anyone, because you have no idea what's in there.
Right. And so it just, for making these proprietary blends, as an example, the business motivators, I think you listed a big one, right? It's just like, I can take stuff out and not be held accountable for it, right? And it's obviously a financial ploy. But what I had initially thought is that, does it have anything to do with perhaps a proprietary blend having some sort of trade secret efficacy that is better than that of X brand down the hall? And also on top of that, is the lowest common denominator for a protein, that's not a good example, for a pre-workout supplement, for whatever complex supplement you have, is the lowest common denominator of that going to be very similar to that of a proprietary blend, where it's just kind of doing some bullshit so that they can.
So I mean, every company is going to say that the reason they have a proprietary blend is because their formula is so superior to every other company, and if they just listed it all out, then someone would just copy them. But at the end of the day, the optimal, let's use a multivitamin for our example here. The optimal multivitamin with no cost, restrictions. Everyone knows the formula. Not everyone, but like everyone in the industry knows what the optimal formula is.
Right,
These things have been ironed out again and again, and it just becomes a thing of, you can slice it two ways. You can either take this this optimal formula, rarely exists. Most companies do not offer it. Now, there are plenty of best, case scenario products out there where they, kind of thread the needle between the trade-offs of the quality and doses of ingredients and the cost. But, some companies are able to thread the needle very well. But at the end of the day, you need to, you have two trade-offs you can make. Either you can cut ingredients entirely and just remove them from your product, not market them, or you can put in very inefficacious doses where you're not getting nearly any of the benefits, but then, still say that it's in there, make the same claims as if you were offering an efficacious dose.
Right.
And, both of those happen all too often. And the proprietary blend just, 9 times out of 10 ends up just being a convenient way to say, our blend is just better and we don't want to disclose that information, when it really is just companies trying to, cut corners. Maybe not cut corners, but, it's, you should be honest about what's in your supplements. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
And do you think that it could possibly be somewhat the allure of like almost reverse marketing to uneducated consumers, perhaps?
Yeah.
Absolutely. This blend is better because it's an in-house. Well, whereas in reality, like you were saying, these concepts have been very well researched and very well ironed out. Like, we know what the best way to go about something. And then to follow that up, are there any, like, I know that we can't, because there's so many different subtopics of supplements, this, that, and all around, right? To do plenty of different things. And obviously, as we were talking about these complex ones, for the consumer that doesn't want to, because obviously your other option would be you go buy online all the individual supplements that you want, and you take them all so that you're in full control of, what you are taking. But for some people, obviously, that's not a grand interest, or it's not, if it's not good for their lifestyle. It doesn't fit with like they don't want to spend that time. What would you recommend for that consumer? Obviously the forward-facing companies, but like, what would you recommend for that consumer to look for so that they're getting the right complex supplement and not getting screwed as well?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, a lot of people get way too into the weeds with supplements, and you really are not going to receive extreme benefits from a wide variety of things. For someone that doesn't want to put a lot of effort in, you can't go wrong with a complex multivitamin. Now, there are tons and tons out there, and I don't want to make like company recommendations,
right, obviously,
because then, sure, there are a few companies that I buy all of my supplements from, and I would recommend them, but I'm not going to recommend them in this setting. If someone wants to talk about it, whatever, I'd be glad to have a conversation, but I don't want to, make it to where, I'm going to trust this advice and go support this company without doing any research. It's like, no, you need to do your own research with all of this. And so I think it really does come down to personal needs, because if you are like, I'm always going to recommend, if someone is coming to me and asking for advice on what supplements to take, my first questions are going to be, how much sleep are you getting? how much water are you drinking, and how much are you exercising, because that will make such a more profound difference in your life than any supplement will. Now, the supplements that are going to be most helpful to people are not the supplements we've been talking about. The supplements that are going to be the most helpful is going to be caffeine. Okay. That can be a supplement, that can be a drug. We can talk about this a little bit because, we have a caffeine epidemic in our country, and I'm a victim. Okay. I have caffeine nearly every day, and it's, that is going to have a much more profound difference on your life than, a vitamin B12. But, your broad-based vitamins, your vitamin B, your vitamin C, your vitamin D, I can always recommend those. Certainly if you have a deficiency, I can always recommend those. I can always recommend, maybe not always, caffeine in the proper dosages and used at the proper times. And we'll get into that because there's a lot of nuance when it comes to that. And there are certain precursors and certain people who, should not be consuming caffeine. And frankly, for anyone who is, fitness oriented, on looking to improve their performance, fitness, whatever it is, certainly if you're an athlete, any of that, I would recommend creatine, which we can also get into that. And I would say a protein supplement, or just, having a more protein rich diet. But at the end of the day, before any of the more complex, vitamins, minerals, all of these certain powders, your probiotics, that type of stuff, it's going to be caffeine, protein, creatine, if you're, need to be kind of, if there's a performance concern for, physical exertion. Right. And really, that's kind of the big ones. I can always recommend fish oil. Now, you can get a lot of that fulfilled with a, high-fat diet, with good, fats, rich fatty foods, high in omega-3s, or, supplement of fish oil. I can always recommend that. And so I think it'd be good to kind of break off into tangents with all those.
Yeah, for sure. Starting with caffeine, because that's everyone's most familiar drug, or drug, supplement, whatever you want to call it. It's both, I'd assume.
The world's most used drug.
I heard a statistic, actually, and I'm pretty sure I'm quoting it correctly. But I think it was over 40% of individuals aged 12 to 18 claim to use caffeine on a daily basis. And individuals 18 and older, 70% of individuals 18 and older claim to use caffeine on a regular basis, on a daily basis, it's
everywhere. It's everywhere, baby.
It's everywhere. So it is, like you said, it is the world's most popular drug, supplement, whatever. Right?
I honestly think we could do a full episode on caffeine. And we might do that at some point. So I'll hit the broad points. We'll go down the bullet points, and then maybe save some of that for a later discussion, because I think that would be interesting. But caffeine, everyone's familiar. At the end of the day, it's just, you need to be smart about your consumption, because there are recommended daily intakes for kind of a healthy adult. You're kind of, to put some numbers in people's heads, in case you're really not unfamiliar, 400 milligrams per day for a kind of a healthy adult with no predispositions is going to be kind of your recommended upper limit. You don't want to be exceeding that in a day, and I would recommend not exceeding 300, frankly. A big thing with caffeine comes down to your timing of it, and also, I think people don't realize how long caffeine stays in your system. And so it's very important, because of the importance of sleep, and how, going back to kind of our pillars of health, if you're using a supplement like caffeine and it's destroying your sleep, you are doing yourself more harm than good, because the sleep you would be getting would be helping you more without caffeine than you are with consuming it. And so,
Right.
consuming that as a detriment to your sleep is a net negative. And so you need to be conscious of that. Caffeine's effects stay in the body for 12 hours after consumption. Now,
The
do they scale?
half-life's 6 hours. So yeah, you'd be at one quarter concentration 12 hours after consumption.
Right. And so, that obviously it's a quarter, but it's still in effect, and
It's
you
still
need
a
to be
lot,
conscious of that. Yeah. And so really consuming caffeine in the afternoon or evening is really never a good idea. Sure, are there times where you need to do it because you have a crazy project, an assignment, something with work, an obligation? Yes. Okay. Have I done it time and time again? Yes. Okay. But I just, want to put that out there because that's the scientific evidence. Those are the facts. And it's important to be conscious of that. So
Right.
obviously, you have the upper end of your daily limit, not exceeding that. I think that's an obvious one. Your timing is very important. A big thing
Right.
with caffeine also, and we can get into the biomechanics a tiny bit. How it works is, it's caffeine. Oh man, why am I blanking on the terms now? All of the lovely neurobiology, but the name of the receptors, adenosine. There we go.
Yep.
So essentially what, caffeine does is it binds to your adenosine receptors, and your adenosine receptors, typically when bound to are what are going to make you tired. And instead, caffeine binds to these receptors, and it creates essentially the illusion of, not being tired. Your body is still experiencing all of the same effects as if the receptors were being bound to. And so it's, that's why it has such a negative effect on sleep, because the binding to the adenosine receptors is a part of your circadian rhythm, where the excretion of these hormones and the chemicals within the brain is what, is going to kind of be regulating your adrenal system throughout the day, where, more of your kind of energetic hormones, your dopamine, your serotonin, that type of stuff, your motivation systems are being secreted. And, that's how you have your energy throughout the day. And at a certain point, because of the chemical reaction when these receptors are bound to, your natural melatonin will be released, and, you're slowly going to be feeling more tired. And, caffeine does not create energy, but it masks the feeling of being tired. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
I agree. I think that might be a common misinterpretation of the actual uses of caffeine itself. The fact that it's not erasing fatigue, it's only masking it, and probably, for that matter, prolonging the issue.
Right. It doesn't fix the problem. It just makes it feel like it's gone away.
And obviously, if your body is claiming to be tired, that is something that needs to be dealt with sleep. The farther you put yourself behind,
exactly.
And I was gonna make obviously you had said that 12 hours, 25% concentration, with the idea that the half-life's about 6 hours. That is given the very, very obvious distinction that you are having one large dose of caffeine at one point in time, and not literally having like a coffee at 9 a.m. and then a coffee at 4 p.m. because what happens, it just starts that cycle back over. And what's crazy about the half-lives thing is that, sure, 25% by 12 hours, like 15-ish% by 18, 10 by 24. That still means when you get your coffee the next morning, you're still at 10% concentration. And while if you keep up a steady, intake of it that's very similar each day, the effects won't be adverse. But clearly you're still having caffeine in your system 24, 30, 36, 42, 48 hours after initial consumption. And all it does is it compounds. And
absolutely.
Obviously, if your body's regulated to it, then it's not going to have adverse effects that aren't already affecting you.
And that's a big thing. For anyone who is like a caffeine addict, which for plenty of, I have been for a lot of time. I'd say I'm pretty good now about my consumption, but for anyone who is consuming close to that upper limit on the daily, please, please, please take tolerance breaks, because when you build tolerance to caffeine, it's like building tolerance to anything else, to a drug. It's going to take more for you to receive the same stimulus, and it is, rewiring your brain chemistry, because, it just, it's going to require more of X compound to receive Y result, and that only has negative effects. So I do not, I use caffeine nearly every day, but so I'm not trying to demonize it in any way, but please make sure that you are taking tolerance breaks, because it makes a tremendous difference. A week off, and then you can go back and just try and moderate your consumption and be conscious of it. Timing is everything, to be honest. Obviously, you don't want to be passing that upper limit, which I think most people know, but timing is everything. Not too late in the day. And, it is a wonderful, wonderful enhancement. Even like it is, there's a reason it's so popular.
Right. And one of the other things this is definitely interesting, like you said, you can grow to have a certain dependence upon caffeine, just like anything. Absolutely. You can have a dependence upon it. And like we were talking about how, after 24 hours, you're down to whatever, 5% concentration or whatever. The more and more and more you are doing caffeine regularly, the more you're intaking caffeine regularly, the higher that 5% needs to be for you to not have withdrawal symptoms 12 hours, 24 hours after consumption. And like it's true, people get caffeine headaches. Like that's not an uncommon thing.
The withdrawals.
So yeah, I think like you're saying, the importance of the breaks is definitely there. But this isn't something. I don't think this is something that concerns your average, Starbucks consumer.
If you're drinking a coffee a day, you're completely fine. If you're drinking a grande, like a 20 ounce, 24. I don't know how big it is. I don't drink Starbucks coffee, but like. That's a lot. It is a lot of caffeine. You should look, because
it's like
they don't have to closely regulate. And so, just be aware of the dosages. Know what's going into your body.
And it's just like, I think the people that obviously need to have more concern with this are the people that are, like you said, closer to that higher bound, higher level. Here's a question for you, though. Not necessarily a follow-up, completely different. Is there any proven research or perhaps evidence to support there's a difference between the concept of like synthetically created caffeine versus like organically created caffeine, like as in the difference between the stuff that you'd find in your pre-workout supplement versus the caffeine that organically comes from coffee beans, right? Like evidently there's clearly a difference in the origin of those two supplements. Is there any evidence to support there's a difference?
So, I mean, there is a difference. It's really splitting hairs. And also, a lot of even, like your carbonated beverages, your energy drinks, even your pre-workouts have naturally occurring caffeine. Not all of them, certainly. It's harder to suspend a naturally occurring caffeine in a carbonated beverage. And so a lot of times that's going to be where a lot of your synthetics are. It's much easier to put a powder in as opposed to suspending it within a beverage. And that's why there's such a bad rap around energy beverages, mostly for good reason. And people a lot of the times will think of like an energy drink and a pre-workout in the same vein. And a pre-workout a lot of the times can be much, much better for you. And the reason is because it's very difficult to suspend a lot of compounds in a carbonated beverage. And so a lot of companies have to cut corners there and use synthetic compounds, which in moderation are typically fine and don't have, long-term negative health effects. But that is something to be wary of. And there certainly are companies who are willing to cut lots of corners. And at the end of the day, it's because consumers are not well informed and are just going to fall for the marketing ploys, which is unfortunate, but it's the reality of things. So when it comes to the difference between natural and synthetic, it's, it's like the difference between a natural and a synthetic flavoring. At the end of the day, taken in moderation, you're not going to notice any noticeable health effects. The big thing is a lot of times, your synthetic compounds are going to interfere with digestion. Some can kind of interfere with your IGF kind of modulation, which that's kind of a different thing that we might get into. But it's, at the end of the day, taken consciously and in moderation, you won't notice a significant difference. I think the big one would be kind of your suspended carbonated beverages as opposed to like a powder form.
And
or like a coffee.
I think, right. I think that we want to probably at this point move on to talking a little bit. I know you wanted to speak a little bit on creatine. So
yeah,
obviously
we can for a little bit. It has the most awful reputation, and it's easily the one supplement I can recommend the most. And everyone always has just the worst ideas of it in their mind. And, if I kind of sit them down and we talk about it, it makes a lot of sense. And they're like, oh, that's not that bad. And, everyone, all of the moms who think, that it's a steroid and it's going to make your hair fall out and your organs shrivel up and die, is simply not the case, unfortunately. For the people who want there to be examples of that so they can demonize it. But at the end of the day, what are the biomechanics? That's what's important, right? What does creatine do? And it's funny because, we talked about caffeine, where it binds to your adenosine receptors and kind of creates the illusion of a lack of fatigue, kind of masks that. Creatine is a source of energy. Creatine can synthesize ATP and can be a source of cellular energy. Is that the benefit? No, I just think it's an interesting little, side piece just because of the comparison we're making. But what does creatine do? In the most basic way I can explain it, it shuttles, essentially just takes water from other places of your body and shuttles it into your muscular cells, essentially. And that's not just, if you're thinking of, your muscular cells, like it's not just shuttling it into your biceps and your quads and your, all that. No, everywhere in your body. But as a byproduct of that, it is shuttled into, your, what you think of when you think of muscles. And what does this do? First of all, it hydrates the cells. I feel like that's an obvious one. And creatine has a few effects. It volumizes muscles, which is why a lot of people within like the bodybuilding sphere take it. It creates a fuller, more volumized muscle, which is obviously appealing for those type of sports. It hydrates the muscle, which is why athletes in very cardiovascularly demanding sports take creatine, because more intracellular hydration allows you to, resist lactic acid buildup more, and it increases endurance, stamina, all these things. Wonderful benefits for that. What else does it do? It can be a source of cellular ATP. It's not creating, ATP in the same way where you can use it for like cognition. There are some studies. There's not a great amount of literature to support this, but there are some studies to support that creatine has cognitive benefits in long-term brain health and kind of the efficiency of your cognition. But I don't want to go too far into that because it's not super, super concrete yet. But where it has been proven is just everywhere else, the source of kind of intracellular energy, your ATP, created as creatine synthesized, or not synthesized, but kind of absorbed by the body and used throughout. And so that's an obvious benefit as well. And, at the end of the day, when you think of all of those things, it's what are the negatives? And everyone paints so many negatives. The big one and the most funny one that has been completely disproved, and there are studies to support this. I don't know off the top of my head, and I can't quote them, but a quick Google search will pull up plenty of studies that have disproven this because it became such a big misconception. But a lot of people think that creatine causes your hair to fall out. which is simply not true. Okay, it is just simply not true. What can be the negative effects of creatine? If you take creatine, and the typical, if you're taking a creatine monohydrate, you do not need to do loading phases. That's kind of, and a vast majority of the creatines that you are going to be buying are going to be a monohydrate form. That's the form I would recommend. That's the form most people are going to recommend. There are niche situations where you would want to use a slightly different complex version of creatine, but most of the time you're going to want to be using a monohydrate, which does not require a loading phase. 5 grams a day is the recommendation for nearly everyone. If you think that you have kind of a predisposition, obviously consult a medical professional and you can work out the proper dosage depending on the situation. But in that use, the only negative side effect is if you are so poorly hydrated that you are unable to shuttle fluids anywhere from your body. And it's basically what's going to happen is you'll start taking from your organs instead of, just basically water that is through, floating throughout your body. And, how much percent of the body is water? I don't remember the middle school statistic, but like 72%. So that's a lot before you're pulling on vital organs. It's never going to kill you. It can create organ strain. Yes. You need to be so severely hydrated for that to happen. And if you are so severely hydrated for that to happen, you're going to be seeing more negatives from dehydration than you are from the effects of creatine. So, that's my, long elevator pitch. There's plenty. It is the most, next to caffeine, it's the most studied supplement on this planet. So much literature to support its benefits. I can recommend it for nearly everyone. If you're an adult above the age of 18, I can recommend it for nearly everyone. And it has very noticeable effects. A lot of these supplements that we're talking about aren't going to have immediately tangible effects. Creatine does, just like caffeine.
Correction, it's 60%, but
okay,
same difference.
You get the idea.
And yeah, like you were saying, but does it? So it does take from just your outside body, but it also does take from your organs at the time of its usage.
It can,
right? So,
but it's not as simple as this. But think of it just like it doesn't prioritize that. There's like a hierarchy almost, and that's not how it works. It works based upon the bioavailability of the fluids it can take to hydrate the cells, but it's like, think about it. If you want to think about it in a hierarchy, organs are way down at the bottom, and you need to have nothing else in supply, in store. You need to be so severely dehydrated for that to take place.
So hydration's just the important.
And hydration is always important.
Codependent on
Drink
the
water, people.
Caffeine usage or creatine usage. My bad.
You'll die by dehydration quicker than you'll die by starvation. So,
a quick tidbit, I suppose.
Yeah, it's important.
It is. I do think that about does it for us though today. I would agree. I think we touched on some very interesting and important topics.
It'd be fun to do maybe an episode on caffeine in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Get more into the weeds with that. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps most of the other things
up. Hope people learned something from this episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed this type of episode. But like usual, you guys can find us in all of our normal places, on YouTube, on Spotify, and pretty much everywhere else where you get your podcasts. But outside of that, I think that is all for us this week. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Cool.